we knew we had tens of thousands of American workers expecting paychecks that Friday. We decided to hit an emergency button at Rippling to actually fund out of our corporate bank account, because we were fortunate to have quite a bit of cash at that time that would be able to cover, I think it was $130 million of payroll at that time, just to make sure those folks would be able to get paid.
How do you raise 9 figures of financing in 12 hours? While the first Twitter-fueled bank run is happening around you, and with hundreds of thousands of employees out there depending on your ability to get the financing done so that their paychecks clear. Today on The Abstract, we have a masterclass in getting financings and deals over the finish line. I'm joined by my friend Vanessa Wu, General Counsel of Rippling. Rippling eliminates the friction from running a business by combining HR, IT, finance, apps, all on a unified data platform. I'm also going to ask Vanessa to give us her description of Rippling and the products that you offer a little bit later. Previously, Vanessa was the GC of LiveRamp, which she helped spin out from Axiom, and she started her career at Latham & Watkins. Vanessa, thanks so much for joining me today for this episode of The Abstract.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I'm really excited for this conversation. We're going to talk about sort of your education as a deal maker, and then how you've been able to apply that to really great effect today at Rippling. As you transition to sort of become a deal maker at LiveRamp, how did you learn that on the fly? How did you become comfortable getting deals over the finish line?
Yeah, no, I think sort of talking about deal work has been, I think this may be the first time that I do it, because I was a litigator by background. So at Latham, I was doing primarily antitrust litigation, and also some employment litigation, commercial litigation as well. And when I went to LiveRamp, my interest was really around privacy. But quickly after I started, our CEO came to me and said, "Hey, we actually are negotiating and have signed term sheets with 2 companies, and we would like to close these both in 2 weeks." So, I was maybe a couple weeks into the job, and was not a corporate lawyer by background, had, never worked on a deal aside from a more like supporting capacity from a antitrust perspective. So I did a little bit of merger work in that regard. So I'd seen a little bit, but definitely not, had no idea, being on the litigation side of the house, what due diligence really looked like from a law firm perspective or otherwise, and really just was thrown right in. But I guess I am maybe that poster child that it isn't necessarily rocket science. I think sort of any legal training can prepare sort of any lawyer to ask questions, and also work with outside counsel and advisors, and get through that process. And so, I went to an initial meeting on these 2 deals that we were trying to accomplish, and some business folks had a question, which I probably shouldn't repeat here, but it was something along the lines of whether or not you could use some of the diligence commercially, which the answer is you cannot. And it was in that moment that, and we did not, to be clear, multiple transactions went through, so it was fine. But it was in that moment that I thought, oh, I'm not a deal lawyer by background, but even I know that maybe actually in this room, I know the most about M&A, shockingly. And so I do have something to contribute and add here to advise this group on how this gets done. So that was my entree, if you will, into M&A.
That's a pretty fast start. Do you think your CEO at the time had sort of any idea what he was asking for and getting 2 acquisitions done in the span of 2 weeks? Did he know he was throwing you into the deep end?
But Travis May, who was the CEO of LiveRamp at the time, has gone on to have found another company and is doing great VC work now. Has since done a number of acquisitions himself, and so yes, there was a little bit of trial by fire, but also I think we at LiveRamp thought those two acquisitions were actually really well executed. And if you don't shoot
Mm-hmm.
for the stars, you don't get close to the stars. And so, that's something I always really admired of him, is that he was able to dream big. And we did execute these two deals
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously at the same time. I remember folks like flew and did one signing, then flew and did the other signing, and then told both companies about one another, because that was a big part of the strategy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it did ultimately get done. I do remember though that last day prior to closing the M&A transactions, and we were working with Wilson Sonsini at the time. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember having a ton of respect for the stamina of the Wilson Sonsini associates for not sleeping that night, because I was getting emails at 11 p.m. and then an update at 1 a.m. and then an update at 2:30 a.m. then an update at like 4 a.m. and then 5:30 a.m. and just sort of like every hour and a half we were getting updates from this team that was clearly not sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And that next morning, I remember sitting in this conference room with our CEO, and him saying, who knew so much went into M&A deal, and thinking like, I can't remember if I thought it or I said it, but I was like, actually, a lot of people think that and know that, but I love the kind of like naivete, but also like boldness to go for it anyways. So, and it got done.
That's hilarious. I mean, lawyers at law firms get a lot of flack from time to time about billable hours and this and that, but clearly, right? Like there are some circumstances where people really burn the midnight oil for you, and you wouldn't have been able to get done without those outside advisors or without that outside help. Yeah.
Yeah, no, huge kudos to lots of attorneys at law firms and associates who burn more than the midnight oil to help businesses and in-house legal teams accomplish these goals.
I'm curious. That's a fast start. It's a successful start. But I know you've told me a story before, also of a deal that you lost while you were at LiveRamp that really has also shaped your thinking. So, around how to get financings done and the importance, or how to get deals done and the importance of moving really quickly. And can you tell us about that circumstance too? Because I think it sets up your current approach at Rippling really nicely.
Yeah, so my prior company, LiveRamp, was initially a subsidiary of a larger public company, and so we were well capitalized. And then while I was there, we had then sold essentially the parent company for 2.3 billion to a media conglomerate,
Mm-hmm.
IPG, Publicis, and is that there? It's IPG. Yeah,
Yes, it's IPG. Yeah, yeah,
to IPG. And so suddenly we were a relatively smaller company with over $2 billion in cash on the books, and so burning a hole in our pockets, and
yeah. Huh.
so it made sense for us to look, because we could, at a number of other companies, and think about growth both organically and inorganically. And so we did a number of acquisitions while I was there. The one that all of the ones that we wanted to do, we were able to execute on, except one. And that
Mm-hmm.
one transaction I recall occurring over the holidays. And we
Ah.
let our exclusivity period lapse by 2 days over New Year's. Um,
Huh.
it was one of those, okay, I think we had a shorter exclusivity period, not the full standard 30 days. And in those 2 days, another company, I think it was WeWork, was able to swoop up this company. And so it was a good
Huh.
lesson in sort of time kills all deals. Lots can happen day to day.
Mm.
Speed really being a critical factor in accomplishing any sort of transactional work and activity,
Hmm.
and just it behooves sort of internal teams, particularly legal teams, to really move fast. And so I saw firsthand how that could completely change the deal from getting done to not getting done. And I think since then, we've only seen how many black swan events are now becoming like part of our day to day lives. Like COVID could
Uh-huh.
happen, the market could crash, that financing might not be there anymore. A bank could collapse. I've now lived through enough of these events to know that when you have something, like the goal and the objective from the legal perspective should just be to get that closed as quickly as possible, responsibly, but as quickly as possible.
We're going to chat a little bit in just a minute about those sort of black swan events and some of the ones that you've been through. I gave a little bit of background in my intro, but I probably did not do justice exactly what rippling does, and I think that context is actually pretty important for what we're going to talk about next. Would you be willing to describe Rippling's business, the products you offer, who you serve, and how ultimately like consumers and workers are affected by Rippling as well, even though you're B2B?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think even though I've been at Rippling now over 5 years, I haven't quite nailed the elevator pitch, but I'll do my best. Rippling is an all-in-one platform across HR, IT, and finance. What that means sort of tangibly is that we create software that helps small businesses and medium-sized businesses run their day-to-day operations. So payroll
Hmm.
and an HR system to help employees onboard and offboard and change roles as they grow and develop with companies. On the finance side, there's also corporate cards and expense management and reimbursements,
Hmm.
and bill pay. On the IT side, we do app management like Okta and device management so that folks can kind of receive and their laptops and have them provisioned correctly. So, all
Hmm.
in one, HR, IT, finance to help businesses run their business and do what they do best.
And you joined early on, right? You were the first lawyer at
I was
Rippling,
the
is that
first
right?
lawyer
Yeah.
at Rippling when we were about 100, 125-ish employees.
Uh-huh.
And then over the 5 years, we are now, I believe, over 3,000 employees globally.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
been pretty
That's even
exciting.
bigger than I thought.
Yeah.
um, Talk to us a little bit about the first financing that you did at Rippling, working with Parker Conrad, the CEO, and how that might have given you a slightly different perspective, or how you brought a slightly different perspective to the table about how to get venture financings done well.
Yeah. So the very first financing we did, what that I did with Rippling, was our B round. We had actually taken some safes, which is pretty atypical before our B. So after the Series A, which is when I joined, we had certain additional demand, and
Mm-hmm.
so we said, sure, you can write an uncapped safe if you would like. So there was some sort of pre-financing work that I had worked on prior to the B. The B, though, occurred after COVID started. So we weren't planning to take financing or do a financing at that time. But if you remember back, March 2020, the
Yep.
world shut down pretty spectacularly. From a
Yes.
software perspective, throughout April, just markets cratered and no one was really sure if anyone would be buying software anytime soon. We were fortunate to have been well capitalized, but we also, like everybody else, was not sure what the economic recovery would look like after that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were considering many options, but as it looked like things were going to progress, we thought it might be wise to have a little bit extra in our war chest at that time. And so
Mm-hmm.
we had some investors who were very interested. Founders Fund ultimately led that
Yeah.
round. We only went to a couple insiders and a couple other parties at that time, and did that first financing in July. But it was a very turbulent, choppy market. And so, again, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to make sure we were closing that deal as soon as we had our term sheet very, very quickly, but also very responsibly. And I can talk about that too a little bit if that.
Please. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's super interesting. Yeah.
So, some things that we do differently at Rippling in terms of our financings is we prepare what we call our advanced disclosures. In
Mm-hmm.
any financing, you sign your financing agreement documents and you agree about a whole bunch of things, not just price, but also you make all these representations about what your business does and doesn't do. So,
Yep.
like, requests that you represent that you comply with all applicable laws and all
Mm-hmm.
AML requirements, and you have no contracts anywhere in the world that are ever imperfect, and just sort of you're saying like our business is spotless. And then
Mm-hmm.
you pair that with a document called your schedule of exceptions, which is just a fancy way of saying disclosures. And so you have this disclosure document, your schedule of exceptions that you pair with your agreement. And what we do is we create a abridged version of those schedule of exceptions because you kind of know what disclosures to expect from investors. They're pretty standard. And so you can
Uh-huh.
kind of prepare in advance what all of your disclosures look like and what you want to know about your business. And we shared that with our investors prior to the term sheet. And we
Hmm.
said, we want you to review this. And we want you to ask us, material questions, so that this is eliminated as a major item as part of standard due diligence as we
Mm-hmm.
progress in the deal. And it's not that you're not allowed to do diligence, but we want to make sure at a high level you understand sort of our critical risk factors prior to signing a term sheet with us. And
Right.
that's what we did in the B. And we had, some light diligence conversations with founders funds outside counsel at that time. And then we've obviously went into the deeper discussions actually during the diligence process. But before the term sheet, we did that too.
And you continue to do that today. This practice of having a set schedule of exceptions or advanced disclosures, sharing that even in advance of receiving a term sheet. I mean, I guess one, just to call out for the audience, this is unusual, right? It's like a slightly different practice than what a lot of other companies that are doing venture financing are doing. But two, I think it enables you to close these financing rounds faster is what you found. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess, one question folks might have is why do you do that? This is not just
Yeah.
unusual, it's extremely unusual. I've not heard from outside counsel or anybody that any other company has ever done this. Why over disclose and why disclose before your term sheet? It's just like
Uh-huh.
really, it's a lot. And part of this is like, and we fully acknowledge this. Our CEO has a history. He had a
Mhm.
prior company, and at that prior company, there were issues with some of the disclosures made in a financing,
Mhm.
and so he personally feels really, really strongly that we disclose and ensure that our disclosures are very comprehensive,
Uh-huh.
to a degree that I think most companies just don't do. And we've
Mhm.
had a number of discussions about this, the CEO of Rippling and myself, on like the value of disclosure
Uh-huh.
and how like a lot of companies are actually afraid to disclose, and so they end up taking more risk, and that actually it's a helpful thing and helps the company and him sleep at night that we disclose all of our risk factors and that we are very comprehensive with it.
Mhm.
I have talked to him about, the risk that when we send these disclosures out, that they get blasted all over the internet or shared. And his view has been these are, generally investors that are more trusted parties.
Mm-hmm.
They want to do a deal. We want them to really understand what they're getting themselves into. It benefits all the parties, and I agree with that. And now that we've sort of done this repeatedly for our B, our C, our D, and now our E, um,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of just become part of the pattern and practice of rippling financing, which is really cool. I also think it enables us to not sacrifice the diligence that our investors are able to do on rippling while still enabling us to maintain speed.
Yeah.
Um, so that we're like doing diligence in parallel to the more business pricing negotiations happening.
I mean, a couple of thoughts there that I'd love your reaction to, and then I'm curious to start talking about these sort of black swan events and SVB. I
Yeah.
mean, one is, the immediate reaction so you would tell someone perhaps like we did a financing in 12 hours or 36 hours or 48 hours is, well, you've got to be sacrificing on diligence somehow, right? But with this approach, not necessarily. The other thing that I'd be curious for your sort of view on is, it actually probably sets you up very well. I mean, this is getting a little bit ahead, but like sets you up very well when you're going to be a public company someday, perhaps, right? Because you're going to need all these risk factors in an S1, and it's more comprehensive disclosures are going to be required and necessary at that point in time, anyways. So maybe the fact that so few companies do this is more a function of private markets than anything else.
Yeah, I think actually maybe something I didn't mention is we have this
Yeah.
schedule of exceptions which responds to each of the representations you make in the
Hmm.
purchase agreement. But we actually also have a full set of risk factors that we also attach
Ah.
to our schedule exceptions, which
Uh-huh.
we are not required to do, which we understand from outside counsel. No one does, and no one tries to put that in their schedule exceptions, and all of the like, never, 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 never. But then we talked about like, but we want to do it, and we want this to be in our schedule exceptions, and now it's become part of our documents ever since that B round. And I do agree. I think it's set us up for a level of maturity to be able to produce these disclosures as not a one-time thing, but something that we try to keep up to date at Rippling. Um,
Hmm.
to have that level of not like I definitely don't think we are doing the full public company like disclosure process,
Sure.
but it has enabled us to really and myself uh, especially understand what's happening at the business from a risk perspective from the get-go,
Yeah.
trying to produce these disclosures and keep them evergreen regardless of whether we are financing or not.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I hadn't quite thought that piece through, which is someone who's running legal and compliance and risk, or even if for whatever reason you go out and you want to recruit a new CFO, or right. I mean, you have something to hand to that person beyond just here are the board decks and minutes from the past few meetings, or here's our financials, right? And you can also use this set of risk factors to drive parts of your roadmap, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have areas that we have disclosed as our risk factors, and we say we would like this to not be a risk factor by
Yeah.
end state. And so that can be, very helpful for us to kind of see what our
Hmm.
holes are, not just sort of experience, the various gaps and but like see them so we can develop maturity plans around what this would look like when we disclose.
The abstract is brought to you by SpotDraft, an end-to-end contract lifecycle management system that helps high-performing legal teams become 10 times more efficient. If you spend hours every week drafting and reviewing contracts, worrying about being blindsided by renewals, or if you just want to streamline your contracting processes, SpotDraft is the right solution for you. From creating and managing templates and workflows to tracking approvals, e-signing, and reporting via an AI-powered repository, SpotDraft helps you in every stage of your contracting. And because it should work where you work, it integrates with all the tools your business already uses. SpotDraft is the key that unlocks the potential of your legal team. Make your contracting easier today at SpotDraft.com. So let's talk about maybe sort of the well, besides COVID, biggest black swan event or black swan event that really drove a financing round for Rippling, and that's the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. Ultimately got bought by JPM. Nobody's going to expect you to have sort of the authoritative history. Did I get that right? I saw you look away. Was it Public who got bought by JPM?
Oh, I think SVB got bought by, forget their name.
It's okay. I can't recall. One of them got bought by JPM and someone else got bought by someone else.
First Republic got bought by JP Morgan.
That's right. No one's going to expect you to have this sort of authoritative history on SVB, but can you talk us through from sort of like Thursday when this started to come to light, and then through the weekend, what happened here? How was Rippling affected? How did you get sort of pulled in to an all hands on deck effort to raise money over the course of a weekend, and why?
I'm taking a moment to recollect, because I think all of us at Rippling who experienced it have tried to not relive the trauma.
Yeah.
It ended up being an amazing moment for Rippling, but in the moment, it did feel like the world was possibly ending. So that Wednesday night, SVB had made a disclosure that started spooking the markets. And over the course of Thursday, it happened quite quickly that things went from my feeling a little bit unsettled about SVB to SVB CEO, getting on a call with all customers around noon to say everything is fine. We are going to be able to cover all deposits so long as not everybody pulls out all of their money, which was not what anybody really wanted to hear, because then everyone's thinking about like, well, I better not be the last person, because then what I'm hearing is there's money for most of us, but not if you're last man or woman standing.
Yep.
And so then I think sort of like that deep panic started setting in towards the afternoon of Thursday. But most folks thought, like this wasn't meaning like there was going to be no SVB in by the next day. Folks thought there were like multiple people who were circling as buyers and other things. We at Rippling sort of take very swift action. So we ourselves did have board meeting that night to discuss transitioning over to our other banking partner, JP Morgan, by the following week. And we thought that was quite drastic, and doing it in a week would be quite drastic. And we started getting folks spun up quite quickly. But we did not predict that by the following morning, that Friday morning, the world would have just completely changed. So that Friday, I woke up, there is an unknown phone number. Someone had found my phone number, a woman in Tennessee, to call and ask if I worked at Rippling, and that her employees had not received their paychecks. And so, I think it was probably 5 a.m, got online and saw lots of people scurrying around, because we were starting to get calls in from the East Coast that paychecks were not being received for Friday payroll. And a lot of hourly workers typically get paid on Fridays. They're on weekly or biweekly schedules. So this tends to be everyday American workers who are paid on average of like $50,000. So good wages, but not sort of tech salaries, if you will.
Sure.
And so folks who are more likely to live paycheck to paycheck. So we knew immediately that this was a huge problem. And I think we had, 40, 50,000 American workers across the country who were expecting paychecks via Rippling that day. So we sort of sprung into action. At SVB, they had told us the payments went out, they were just delayed. And so they were
Mm.
somewhere in the ether between leaving SVB and landing in these bank accounts. And then
Uh-huh.
we saw in the news at the same time everyone else saw in the news that SVB had been taken under receivership by the FDIC.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in active communications with folks at SVB. I recall they sent an email like we're about to step into a meeting. And then one of them sent an email back that just said, no wires going out today. And I remember writing an email back immediately, what about ACH? And I got bounced back by like 30 different people at SVB who were on this thread. And that's sort of when I knew we were on our own. Just
Uh-huh.
SVB's communication systems were fully cut. Moments prior, they were telling us this was all still going to go out. And that's when we really sprang into action. We knew we had, tens of thousands of American workers expecting paychecks that Friday. We decided to hit an emergency button at Rippling to actually fund out of our corporate bank account because we were fortunate to have quite a bit of cash at that time that would
Mm-hmm.
be able to cover. I think it was $130 million of payroll at that time, just to make sure those
Mm-hmm.
folks would be able to get paid. We were in conversation with JP Morgan team. They had a few dozen folks working with us to move our entire payroll system over to JP Morgan. So that would be up and running on Monday, and we would be able
Mm-hmm.
to facilitate paychecks. That next Wednesday was mid-month pay day as March 15th. So that was going to be a really big one. And then Parker, our CEO, wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to pay folks that following week for March 15th, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of those funds for March 15th payroll were held up at SVB, and we were not sure
Mm-hmm.
when they would be released. And so, very quickly, he started making phone calls. We could fundraise, we could take a loan, we could, do a whole bunch of different options. And one of our great partners, Green Oaks, big shout out to them. They were like,
Mm-hmm.
we would love to do a financing with you. We will sort of provide $500 million to Rippling. They understood we would then possibly just loan that all straight out to our customers
Uh-huh.
to ensure that they would be able to meet their payroll obligations the following week. And the critical thing was that it needed to be done over the weekend by Monday so that those funds would be in seat and we could tell customers that that's what we were going to do. So those were kind of the key conditions of the deal, dictating the timing of it all.
So in effect, all of that sort of prior experience that you had around learning how to get deals done really quickly, the approach that Rippling had to get other rounds of financing done. I mean, in some ways, you're perfectly positioned to be one of the few companies that might actually be able to raise $500 million over the course of a weekend, as opposed to with 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever it is to negotiate the term sheet.
Yeah, I'm really proud of a few things that weekend. Like in addition to all the people who were working on this deal, and also how we responded to the crisis and situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm also proud that we did not sacrifice diligence through that
Mm-hmm.
process. So, Parker and I were talking that Friday morning. He said, "I'm going to go out and see what we can do fundraising." We were all just like in emergency fix it mode, and said, "Great, I'm going to prep on my team." We were
Mm-hmm.
going to prep all of our materials so that they were ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did a full refresh of our disclosure documents and our agreements, financing agreements. And like they were already in pretty good shape. We did a refresh of all of our document disclosures as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time that term sheet was signed, which was like that late afternoon, early evening, just he's like a fundraising uh, like magician. We were sign term sheet. Who is your counsel? Can you work with counsel that we've worked with previously? Actually, I think they worked with, oh yeah, that we worked with previously, and so that was
Mm-hmm.
Gunderson. Gunderson also represented some of our prior investors. And one big shortcut trick that I love to do is have your investors work with counsel who's represented other investors and has seen
Ah,
diligence in your company, because then you can just
uh-huh.
ask your investors to share their diligence memos and notes. So, immediately contacted the leads for our Series
Smart.
B and our Series C and said, can we share diligence notes with the Green Oaks team?
Mm-hmm.
And then also, here is a level up of our documents, and here's a level up of all of our disclosures so that we could get through that really quickly.
And just before I ask you maybe a couple more questions on sort of your approach to financing, just to put sort of like the cap on this, like, did Rippling end up needing the money? Right? Like, did this work itself out? Like, I mean, I think everybody would agree that um, this was a huge event for positive reputation that Rippling has, in the investor community in Silicon Valley. I mean, obviously should be with all of those small businesses and their employees too, right, whose paychecks would have been backstopped. Yeah, what ended up happening?
Yeah, so we were working on the financing. Sunday night, the government made the decision to back all deposits, so not just up to the 250,000, in that they
Mm-hmm.
would do so by Monday morning. So by Sunday night, we felt that a lot of the monetary pressure was off. Theoretically, at least
Mm-hmm.
the government had said they were going to do this. And so we actually had a decision at that time in terms of whether we go through with the financing. And we decided that we wanted to continue with the financing, even though we did not need the funds at that time, that it would be
Mm-hmm.
a good war chest to have as a company for future resiliency. We also thought the terms were good to kind of fund future innovation efforts. And also, we believe quite strongly in the term sheet,
Yeah.
that both parties had agreed to these terms, and like Green Oaks really stepped up to the plate here in
Mm-hmm.
terms of putting together a pretty extraordinary deal for us over the weekend. We also weren't sure what the next week would bring. We were for the
Right.
first time running payroll on a new with a new banking partner.
Mm-hmm.
A lot could have gone wrong. We also didn't know Monday morning as SVB came back online whether or not that was going to go smoothly. Like, quite easily, they could have been overwhelmed with volumes. I think they were in the beginning of the day. And
Mm-hmm.
so, just from a resiliency perspective, we thought it would be a good idea to continue through with the financing. From a reputational perspective, we didn't really know what to think. We also were concerned
Sure.
that folks would think we were unstable, and that
Hmm.
we would take a hit.
Mm-hmm.
And so this financing would be good as a bridge if that happened. What actually ended up happening on Monday is, because of the rippling response and covering all of this payroll on Friday out of our own bank accounts and moving so quickly to the other system with JP Morgan. We had, I think, our largest demo day on Monday. It was like, just, I remember it being such a
Huh.
like gratifying moment, because we
Uh-huh.
we really thought, like, we didn't think that was what was on the other end of this. We thought this was all net negative for Rippling, that we were going to lose customers, and folks would be concerned about our stability. And instead, what we saw was customers really respecting the response, seeing that, like, we really cared about our customers and that we were
Mm-hmm.
actually like, quite resilient and had taken all these steps and had the ability to move to an even more mature, secure banking platform.
Just a few more questions for you, Vanessa, around this topic of financing. It's you and the legal team who are really driving a lot of this or owning it. I would say. Can you talk about how you work or collaborate with finance? Whether or not you think that the way that you own it is also unusual, or if you see that amongst a lot of your peers as well. Like, how does that legal finance relationship work at Rippling?
Yeah, I would say like I definitely don't own a financing end to end,
Sure.
and our finance team is very involved for sure. In terms of how this is done at other organizations, I'm not super sure. I've sort of what
Uh-huh.
colleagues of mine say, but I do think folks sort of approach these things very differently. I do feel sometimes I ask outside counsel, like, are we like the craziest people you work with? Are we super organized? Are we disorganized? Where are we on the scale? And um, generally, what I hear as feedback is we are like equal parts like conservative and aggressive, or aggressively conservative, and all together, and that's a sort of a rare combination. But I do think we try to keep all of our stuff in order and then push really aggressively on timeline for, in the vein of time killing all deals. To the question about like the partnership between finance and legal, I sort of see finance being a big part of getting to the term sheet.
Hmm.
They are definitely the driver in the financial story, and they are doing the bulk of that work up to the term sheet, more with the legal team in the background getting prepared for right before the term sheet with our advanced disclosures. But then really once that term sheet is signed, we view that as our go clock.
Yeah.
How quickly can we get everything to investor counsel so that it's all sitting with, on their side of the fence. And then we
Hmm.
can ask them for, when we can close. And our answer to that is we like to try to get everything to diligence counsel by the next day after a term sheet.
Wow.
So all diligence and drafts of the stock purchase agreement and all financing docs.
Maybe one follow up there. You talk about asking for sort of benchmarking with from outside counsel around how Rippling is relative to other clients that they have, or I mean, maybe something that's unusual that Rippling has in a lot of these financings is that we haven't talked too much about is some leverage, right? In that hot company, growing company, grown even faster than I knew in terms of employee headcount, and obviously that's tied to revenue as well. Does leverage fit into the equation here too, in your ability to get deals done fast?
I think negotiating leverage comes in, and I think we've definitely been a really fortunate position to do financings when because we have a very solid company and metrics behind us.
Mm-hmm.
That it comes into play mostly with getting into the term sheet.
Hmm.
It is sort of eliciting that investor interest around sort of the fundamentals of your business and getting to the term sheet.
Mm-hmm.
I think on the legal side, you can tie that in to like take a more conservative position around disclosures, as we have done. It certainly doesn't hurt. But there's still things you can do as a legal team to drive timeline on your own, such as having all of your disclosures and documents ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I did with the B is before we knew we were financing, I said, to our outside counsel, send me your most recent like growth diligence checklist, and we just work through it in advance, and we deliver. We don't ever ask for someone to send us a diligence checklist. We send them what we think their diligence checklist should be,
Ah,
along with the set of
yeah.
diligence. And then it's, if there's anything else, let us know. And usually they're just like, this is too much. We just, not like we're not dumping. It's just like we give everybody everything we think that they would need to know, and we do it all at once and up front. And so there's not a ton of follow-up needed on additional documents or additional questions that come up.
Any final tips you might have as we close this part of the conversation for folks about how to keep processes moving faster on deals, or even how to keep fees down?
I have one I love on fees, which is in
Yeah.
every term sheet, there's a part that says like how much of the fees of diligence counsel the company is going to cover.
Hmm.
And that tends to be tied to like how much diligence you should expect
Hmm.
from diligence counsel. And so if you have those at like 200,000, you're probably going to get $200,000 worth of questions. Um, and if you have parties bear their costs, then folks are going to be tied more towards like where they actually think there's risk. And so I wouldn't have that just be a throwaway item that you don't negotiate
Yeah.
as part of term sheets. I actually think drives a lot of what that diligence process looks like as well.
I like that. That's a good tip. I've got a few fun questions for you as we start to wrap up. The first is if you could tell us maybe about your favorite part of your day to day. You have a super interesting job that touches all sorts of different functions within Rippling. Is there something you get to do every day that that you really enjoy, that gets you out of bed in the morning?
It depends. You know what I most like is that no 2 days are exactly the same.
Sure.
Honestly, I think the part of legal work that I enjoy the most is like getting to work on regulated products and sort of see you. We at Rippling use our product, and our legal team uses our own products, and so it's kind of cool to think about what you would like to see out of a product, and then have it
Yeah.
realized into real life.
Hmm.
And so that's definitely really fun. And then like I don't get to do this every day. It's actually quite rare. But the former litigator in me actually sometimes finds disputes where we feel like we've been like wronged. We don't sort of pick fights that we don't feel strongly about. That's sometimes fun to scratch the litigator, ex-litigator itch from time to time.
A message to all of our listeners: don't cross Vanessa, whatever company she's at. um, how about maybe your biggest professional pet peeve? This can be light. This doesn't need to be too deep.
No, I so my biggest pet peeve is just unnecessary deadline or unnecessary fires. Um,
Hmm.
I say that all the time. I'm like, I just
Yeah.
do not stand for unnecessary fire drills because in the legal role, there's so many necessary fire drills, like unnecessary ones, just that like could have been prevented with better planning or like communication. I don't have much tolerance for that.
That's great. I really like that. Every company can learn from that pet peeve,
Yeah, I don't
including
find
my own.
unnecessary fire drills to be fun. You know, like it's just we in like the legal and compliance functions
Yeah.
uh, are often already on the receiving end of fires and like I'm
Mhm.
doing a lot of firefighting. And so if that fire didn't need to happen, like why are we having getting all bent up over something that doesn't actually require that reaction?
Last question before my traditional closing question for all of our guests. Is there a book that you've read recently, or you're very busy? It could have even been in the past few years, legal or otherwise, just for fun, that you would recommend that folks pick up for their next vacation,
Ooh, for next vacation. Um,
or for their commute across the country on a plane, or whatever it is.
I mean, I don't think this is beach reading, but I really like the Matt Levine money stuff column.
Oh yeah.
He writes for Bloomberg. I think he just does an amazing job of turning kind of dry, complex financial and legal
Hmm.
topics into like just really digestible, humorous, and like really well written, well informed articles. And I am super fan and jealous of his writing style and abilities.
That's a great recommendation. My last question for you, Vanessa, I like to ask this of all of our guests. This is, if you could look back on your days, maybe at Latham or just graduating from law school, just getting started, something that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then.
When I was so when I joined Latham, that was the first time I had worked at a company that was for profit and made money.
Hmm.
Aside from like when I spent, I think like a blip at like Nordstrom's doing like annual sales in high school.
Uh-huh.
And so I did not think I was going to be like at Latham for a very long time or doing for-profit work for a very long time. And doc review definitely doesn't like elicit a desire to like join that profession long term either. But and and I used to complain unnecessarily,
Mhm.
like as a first year associate as well. Apologies in advance for the folks who like worked with me at that time. But then I had a like a change of heart or a flip in mentality, which was that I was going to like work on things I thought were interesting or I thought
Mhm.
like are interesting. And I guess what I would tell myself like now, back then is like that is like definitely like something that has served me well. I've seen serve other people well because you just don't know where your career is actually going to go and how all of those experiences kind of come together later on. And so there are a ton of experiences at Latham. I would take on like I really enjoyed working with one particular partner who did sort of
Mhm.
executives doing bad things employment work, and then
Ah,
as a result did one wage an hour case with her. And now I'm at an HR tech company and I like actually know a lot of the wage and hour laws, and what that looks like because I did this one matter because I just thought it was interesting, back
yeah.
when I was a third year associate at Latham.
You never know exactly when a piece of knowledge that you pick up because you sit in on a product team meeting or you read a book on vacation or you talk to somebody interesting will prove useful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of The Abstract. This has been so practical and interesting. And if anybody out there is writing the history of the SVB crisis, they should listen to this one too.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me, Tyler. I can't remember when we probably first met back at like some tech GC dinner years
Yeah.
and years ago, but sort of, in the spirit of like coincidental meetings that become, peers and colleagues, you're definitely one of them. So,
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm lucky to have gotten to know you, and so many of the other guests on this podcast too. And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of The Abstract, and we hope to see you next time.